Did you look up what Barry Habib said?
So which time?
Just yesterday. So if you watch what Barry Habib said, his team pulled MBS Highway, Barry Habib, his team pulled out the key statistics that are causing the inflation, right? They pulled it out of the CPI. Do you know what the key statistics are? Dog, like pet services, like dog grooming and things of that nature.
Yep.
Okay, so that's what's keeping inflation high. Airline tickets.
Travel, yep.
Travel. And there's like 2 or 3 other ones that he mentioned, and none of them have any bearing on everyday life. It's no longer groceries. It's no longer leases or rent. So you're telling me we're going to continue to hike interest rates because airlines are charging more to fly? Because people are paying for their dogs? Barry Habib said it perfectly. Go watch his video on MBS Highway if you haven't. We are going to pay more because people are getting their dogs groomed?
Well, it goes to look at the employment numbers. And I'm guarantee you that's the exact statistic that they're talking about.
He's a dummy.
Their indicator.
He's a dummy.
Because they're looking at, I know, but they're looking at the numbers of overall unemployment and employment numbers. They're not looking at industry based.
Let me explain something on that. Go into what those numbers say. Do you know what those numbers say? They say there's more jobs today. There's less unemployment today.
Right.
Let me tell you something.
But it's hospitality, which is not.
No.
Jobs.
It's not even that. It goes further. It goes further than that. You know what it is? We have an issue right now with a shrinking number of people being alive. We're having a population issue. People talk about it. If you don't believe it, look it up.
That's true.
There's a population. There's an age of population. There's less people in the workforce. So when there's less people in the workforce, guess what that means? There's less people unemployed. Guess what? The other piece, you're talking about hospitality. You're 100% right in what you're saying. Let me get into this for everybody. There are more jobs, but less full-time jobs now than there were. What? Like, I am absolutely baffled that we can sit here as the Fed chair, Jerome Powell, you can sit here and you can say, you know what? We need to see we're going to continue to hike. Let me hurt the American people. Let me hurt the working class. Because when they continue to hike these interest rates, that means people are going to end up unemployed. I don't give a damn what anybody says. That's what it means. So as long as they continue to hike the unemployment, you have a risk of losing your job, American working class. Plain and damn simple. And the fact that Jerome Powell can't look at and say, oh, okay, we have less people in the working population. Our population is shrinking. Everybody's talking about that. So the unemployment number is skewed from that standpoint. And then the fact that you can't separate out and say, hey, there's less full-time jobs now. There's more part-time jobs, and realize, you know what? We are in a recession. Jerome Powell's a dummy. Janet Yellen's a dummy. All the people at the Fed, the fact that they are so incompetent, I'm like, are they doing this on purpose to drive all the wealth to the big banks? And I don't think so. I think that they are extremely incompetent. They don't know what they're doing. So anybody who has an understanding of this industry and watches their press conferences, their interviews, and watches them testify before Congress, if you're a working class person, there is no way that you can vote for people who put these morons in charge. And that's on both sides of the aisle. Both sides of the aisle, because they were incompetent under Trump's administration too. It's both sides of the aisle. But the problem is our leadership in this country is either corrupt or dumb. It's just, we have a bunch of incompetent people running things, and we did not need it to get to this point, and it's only going to get worse from here because they don't recognize that inflation is done.
Right.
Inflation's over. Okay, yeah, the numbers are staying around 6% right now. Why is that? Because the new leases and the new signed leases and the cost of living
sheltered
inflation is not in yet.
Right.
It's a 12-month rolling average, and by May 10th, you're going to see it's going to be in the 3 to 2% range. And it's just fucking wild that the Jerome Powell, the Fed chair, cannot see that, and he's saying inflation is still high because of certain key indicators. If airline tickets are a key indicator, then I'm fucking Superman.
Right. Right. Because you have these leases that are from 12 months ago that are still before inflation had peaked. You have car loans and leases from 3 to 5 years ago. I mean, it's going to continue to increase because of that. That doesn't mean that that's where the natural inflation rate of the economy is. But I mean, more to that, because the Fed's over here too saying, oh, it's stable, especially with the banks, that it's stabilizing.
It's not stabilized.
Yes, we'll be
If
there.
you keep
It's not
hiking,
stabilizing.
It's not stabilized.
Because they're sitting here saying, oh, but week over week, it's the amount of draws from banks for like the emergency draws that the Fed issues is decreasing. So but look at the actual number. It decreased from 164.7 billion to 163.9 billion.
What was that?
In emergency draws by banks.
Oh, so
since the 2 weeks that they've been started.
What was that, 500,000?
That's
500 million.
What? Yeah, 700 million. I mean, which is a large number. When you're talking hundreds of trillions of dollars, that's not much of an improvement.
No, it's not.
And a lot of that is because of private investors, is because of other people that are also getting into banks. And that's why I brought up the whole Tepper thing. But the government still will get in there and start intervening with that. What incentive?
But that wasn't our government. That was Swiss government.
It was not. But at the same time, like, it still stands because right now we have a global economy. Mm-hmm. Like, so you start talking about Europe. I mean, look at what that's going to do to Deutsche Bank. If Deutsche Bank suffers, and that's one of the major banks in Europe, like if that suffers, like we might be looking at a completely bigger issue.
What issue do you think that would be?
I mean, if the major banks start failing,
yeah.
I mean, you're looking at a collapse of economies.
Okay, good.
Like,
I mean, it's not good. It's not good.
It's not. But
let me say this. So I've been saying this for years. A collapse of economy is terrible because that means there's going to be more deaths of people who don't have the money, right? Deaths, not deaths, death. Like they're going to die. There's more starvation, things of that nature, right? So the collapse of economies is never good for those reasons right there. With that being said, we should have let them freaking fail in 2008, but we didn't. We bailed them out. And the problem is, what happens? There's an incentive now for these heads of the banks not to hedge properly because they know they're going to get bailed out.
Right.
You don't think that the European Union is going to bail out Deutsche Bank?
Yeah, I mean, they absolutely would.
There's no such.
They have to.
Why? Why do they have to?
Or else their economies and their countries would collapse.
The whole world's would. Right. Everybody goes down. If everybody goes down together, it's not a collapse. It's a major hit. It's a major recession, possibly a depression, and it stings and it hurts. But you want to know what hurts more? The fact that they're picking winners. And people in 2008 argued that.
Agreed.
Guess what? Guess what that means? In 10 years, we're going to be in the same spot, 10 to 15 years. It's 14 years later, 15 years later from 2008, and we're having the same damn conversation. Now, it's a different situation than 2008, but guess why we're here? Because these heads of the banks, they made bad fucking investments. They didn't diversify the investments. They did not diversify their investments at all. There's no incentive for them to do so because they know they're going to be bailed out. So you don't have the elite, the cream of the crop actually running these places. You want to know how you get the cream of the crop? You stop bailing them out, you allow them to fail, and you allow other people to take their place. Because guess who's taking the place? The cream of the crop takes the place. Look at the mortgage industry. The mortgage industry, especially on the broker channel, because I do want to talk about this. The broker channel, you have the best lender in the country right now who's number one in all of lending. Yeah. And it's in the broker channel. You have probably the second best in the broker channel, and they're rivals with each other. How did we get new companies rising up and taking that much market share so they could be number one?
Competition.
The old companies failed. They didn't bail them out. They allowed them to fail. Right. And somebody was there to step in, take their place, and do it better. And if you don't do that, you incentivize people doing what's happening at Silicon Valley Bank and investing in energy smart stuff and investing in long-term bonds and putting too much and not diversifying enough and going to this whole green stuff. Here's the other piece with it. And I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but this is true. They invested in green technologies, meaning environmental healthy technologies, which is good if those are working. But if you overinvest in that and then you overinvest in long-term bonds and you're not diversified enough, that's a problem.
Right.
You have virtue signaling at the top of some of these biggest banks. And I'm not saying Deutsche Bank's in that same situation, but if you're in a situation where your cash is drying up, the other piece was the Fed stress testing? Nope. Another Barry Habib thing that he pointed out that I looked into, the stress test never changed. So it was antiquated.
Talk a little more about that.
I can't talk a little bit more about that.
Okay.
Here's why. I'm not educated enough on it, but I looked into it, and it's the 100% truth. You would have to go back and look at some of the writings and stuff that the Fed put out, and we can get into that on the next episode. But they stress test banks to make sure that they have enough cash on hand to pay out all the withdrawals.
Right.
And there's a certain percentage that they have to have.
That their balance sheets are
right
to a good point.
So
yeah.
the FDIC, I should say, who's the insurer, they do the stress test. The Fed has a hand in it, and there's regulation around the stress test. They never updated the regulation, so the stress test no longer applied to what it was, and they weren't. It should have changed, I guess, in 2002 or 2022 when. From 2020 to 2022, when all this money was printed and all these deposits kept coming in, right? And think about it, like cheap borrowing, more people were spending money, more people were putting money in the bank, and then they were taking that money and they were investing in long-term bonds, like the interest rates would never increase. Like, how stupid.
Yeah.
That's malpractice by the heads of the banks.
It is. I mean, a lot of it that frustrates me goes back to, I mean, it's something we talked about before, like laissez-faire economics. Basically, let things handle themselves, let things balance themselves out. You have these companies, you have these investors, you have all the people. Like, at the end of the day, things will balance and work themselves out.
They always do.
They do. Like, where you're going to run into issues is when it's way more interference, like through government. It may be short term, like smoother in the short term, but long term, you're putting yourself at a disadvantage.
15 years later, we're in a disadvantage.
Exactly. This is all the 2008 stuff. Well, 2020, I think it maybe even a bigger impact on it.
2008 definitely had an impact because they didn't allow them to fail and other people to take their spots. They should have let the big boys fail, and if they failed, it would have put us into a depression. So they were looking at it from a short term, but it's not just us. It would have put the world into a depression, and maybe we needed the reset. I mean, and you don't want to say that because you think about the people who are suffering and the most, it's going to be the working class and the lower class people, right?
Right. And maybe that's what the Fed's trying to do.
If they were trying to do that, they would allow the banks to fail.
Yeah, that's a good point.